My apartment was my sanctuary. A fourth-floor walk-up in a pre-war building with good bones and questionable plumbing. It was the only place in the entire sprawling chaos of the city that felt trawl. Why mine? Every book on the shelves, every crack in the plaster, every mismatched piece of furniture was a testament to the life I had built for myself, by myself. As a paralegal at a massive corporate law firm, my days were spent in a world of sterile glass and steel, dissecting contracts worth more money than I would ever see. My work was precise, impersonal, and soulless, but here within these four walls life was messy and real and entirely my own. I had fought for this little corner of the world, and I cherished its quiet privacy above all else. That's why I noticed the book. It was a small thing. A paperback copy of 100 Years of Solitude that I kept on my nightstand. I was rereading it, and I had a specific bookmark, a thin strip of leather from a trip to Italy tucked neatly on page 94. I knew this for a fact because I had stopped reading mid-paragraph the night before, when I got home from work that evening, exhausted after a 12-hour day of due diligence on a hostile merger. I found the book sitting on my nightstand with the bookmark on page 102. It wasn't a huge jump, just 8 pages, but it was 8 pages I hadn't read. I stood frozen in the middle of my bedroom, a cold dread trickling down my spine. My first thought was a logical one. I must have forgotten. I was tired, overworked. Maybe I'd read more than I remembered, but I knew I hadn't. The image of me placing the bookmark was crystal clear in my mind. I did a slow, methodical sweep of the apartment. The door was locked when I arrived, just as I'd left it. The windows were all secured from the inside. Nothing was missing. My laptop was on the desk. My wallet was in my purse. My grandmother's silver locket was still in its dish. It wasn't a robbery. It was something else. Something stranger, and in a way more violating. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of my job was making me see conspiracies in misplaced bookmarks. I made dinner. I watched TV. I tried to unwind. But the feeling lingered, a low-grade hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my evening. The quiet of my sanctuary now felt different. It felt like it was listening. The next day, before I left for work, I did something that made me feel slightly unhinged. I took a single strand of my long brown hair and taped it, almost invisibly, across the bottom of my apartment door and the frame. A tiny, primitive tripwire. If the door was opened, the hair would break or fall. It was a ridiculous test, but the unease in my gut was real, and it demanded evidence. When I came home that night, my heart was pounding as I walked up the 4 flights of stairs. I reached my door, number for B, and leaned in close. The hair was gone, not broken, not hanging from one side, completely gone, as if someone had seen it and carefully removed it. The cold dread from the night before returned, colder and sharper this time. Someone had been in my apartment again, and they were trying to be careful. They were trying to be invisible. There was only one person who had a key, my landlord, Mr. Thorne. Marcus Thorne was a man who seemed to have been assembled from a kit of unpleasant characteristics. He was tall and doughy, with a condescending smirk that never quite left his face. He always wore suits that were slightly too expensive and smelled of a cloying musky cologne. When he spoke to me, he had a habit of calling me little lady or kiddo, his eyes lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. He was a walking embodiment of everything I despised about men who mistook their mediocrity for authority. The illegal entry wasn't the first issue I'd had. There was the leaky faucet in the bathroom he'd promised to fix for 3 months. There was the time the heat went out for 2 days in the dead of winter and he'd claimed it was a building-wide issue that was out of his hands, a lie I later discovered. When I spoke to my neighbor across the hall, every interaction with him was a lesson in frustration, a slow-moving battle against his apathy and arrogance. But this was different. This wasn't negligence. This was a violation. I needed undeniable proof. The bookmark was circumstantial. The hair was proof to me, but not to anyone else. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent the morning at an electronics store. I bought a small, high-definition nanny cam, the kind disguised as a USB charger. It was motion-activated and would send a notification directly to my phone if it detected movement. It felt extreme, paranoid, like something a character in a thriller would do, but my sense of safety had been so thoroughly punctured that extreme measures felt necessary. I was a paralegal. I lived and died by evidence. It was time to gather some. I placed the camera in my living room, plugging it into an outlet that gave it a clear view of the front door and the main living space. Then I left, go into a coffee shop a few blocks away to work from home. I sat there for hours, nursing a single latte, my laptop open but my eyes glued to my phone waiting. Just after 2 p.m., my phone buzzed, a notification from the camera's app. Motion detected in living room. My heart leaped into my throat, my hands trembled as I tapped the notification. The app opened to a live feed. And there he was, Marcus Thorne. In the middle of my living room, he was walking, slowly, casually, looking around as if he were inspecting the place. He picked up a picture frame from my bookshelf, a photo of my sister and me, and looked at it for a long moment before setting it back down. He ran a hand along the back of my sofa. He peered into the small galley kitchen. He wasn't there to fix anything. He wasn't there for an emergency. He was just there, trespassing, taking inventory of my life. The rage that filled me was so pure, so hot, it was almost dizzying. The sheer entitlement of the man, the absolute disrespect. I watched for 5 minutes as he poked and prodded at my existence. He had no idea he was being watched, recorded. Before he left, he walked over to my desk. He picked up a stack of legal documents I'd brought home from work, flipping through the top few pages with a bored expression. Then he put them down, walked to the door, and let himself out, locking it behind him. The feed went still. I saved the video file. I watched it again, then a third time, each viewing cementing the cold, hard resolve that was forming in my chest. The privacy of my home had been breached. My sanctuary had been invaded. He thought he had power over me. He thought because he owned the building, he owned a piece of me, too. He was about to learn a very, very hard lesson about the difference between a tenant and a victim. He had no idea who he was messing with. He had just trespassed on a paralegal. And I was about to bury him in the paperwork. The next morning, I was waiting for him. I had emailed him the night before, a simple, professional message. Mr. Thorne, I need to speak with you about a matter of some urgency regarding my apartment. Please let me know when you are available. He'd replied with a time 9 a.m. and a tone that suggested I was an inconvenience. Perfect. When he knocked on my door, I was ready. I had the video file saved to my laptop. I had a copy of the New York City Tenants' Rights Guide open to the section on landlord entry. My anger from the day before had cooled and hardened into a calm, sharp focus. This wasn't a shouting match. This was a legal proceeding, and I was on home turf. Mr. Thorne, I said, opening the door. I did not invite him in. I remained in the doorway, creating a physical barrier. Clara, he said, giving me that greasy, familiar smirk. What's the emergency? Did the faucet finally give up the ghost? He chuckled to himself. No, I said, my voice even and cold. The emergency is that you have been illegally entering my apartment. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. He puffed out his chest, a classic intimidation tactic. Now hold on a minute, kiddo, that's a serious accusation. I'm the landlord. I have a right to enter my property for inspections and repairs. You have the right to enter with 24 hours written notice. Or in the case of a genuine emergency like a fire or a flood. I countered, my paralegal training kicking in. You have done neither. You were in my apartment yesterday, at 2:07 p.m. for approximately 5 minutes. You were also here 2 days prior to that. Neither visit was preceded by notice of any kind. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a look of annoyed disbelief. How could you possibly know that? You got a crystal ball. I have a camera, I said flatly. I have video of you yesterday, walking through my living room looking at my personal belongings. It's time-stamped. The color drained from his face. He looked, for a moment, genuinely shocked. He had been caught, and he knew it. But his shock quickly curdled into anger. You're recording me in my own building. He sputtered, trying to flip the script. / That's illegal. That's a violation of my privacy. It's a security camera inside the apartment I legally rent from you, which you entered without permission, I said, not backing down. It is perfectly legal, and it is now evidence. So here's what is going to happen. You are going to give me your word, right now, that you will never again enter my apartment without providing proper, written, 24-hour notice. And you are going to hire a licensed plumber to fix my faucet by the end of this week. It was a reasonable demand, a generous one, considering the circumstances. I was giving him a way out, a chance to apologize, rectify the situation, and we could both move on. A smarter man would have taken it. Marcus Thorne was not a smart man. He was a bully, and bullies don't like being challenged. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. His face was red and splotchy. "You think you can threaten me, little lady?" he sneered, his voice low and menacing. "You're a tenant. A renter. You have no power here. You read your lease. I can enter this apartment when I deem it necessary. You try to pull a stunt like this again, and I'll find a reason to have you out on the street by the end of the month. Are we clear?" He held my gaze, expecting me to wither, expecting me to be intimidated, but all I felt was a clarifying, crystallizing calm. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had confessed, he had threatened me, and he had declared war. "We're perfectly clear, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice quiet. "Thank you for your time." I closed the door in his face, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering not with fear, but with adrenaline. The gloves were off. He thought I had no power. He thought the lease was his weapon, but I worked with contracts 1,000 times more complex than his boilerplate lease agreement every single day. He had threatened to bury me in paperwork. He had no idea that paperwork was my natural habitat. I was going to sue him, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The first step in any battle is to know your enemy. I had a face, a name, and a bad attitude. Now I needed everything else. That evening, I didn't go home after work. I stayed late in the quiet, empty office. Surrounded by the comforting glow of my dual monitors, my firm had access to databases the public could only dream of: LexisNexis, Westlaw, Accurant, tools for corporate warfare that I was now going to deploy for a much more personal conflict. I started with a simple public record search on Marcus Thorne. The basics came up first. Age 52, a handful of previous addresses, no serious criminal record, just a couple of speeding tickets, but there were also a dozen civil suits filed against him over the last 20 years. Almost all of them were from tenants. Suits for security deposits never returned, for habitability issues, for illegal evictions. He'd settled most of them out of court for small amounts. One had gone to judgment, and he'd been ordered to pay a former tenant $3,000. This wasn't his first time bullying someone. This was his business model: intimidate, deny, and settle for pennies if you get caught. Then I dug into the building itself. The owner of record wasn't Marcus Thorne, the individual. It was a limited liability company, /Thorne Properties LLC. This was standard practice. A way to shield personal assets, but it was also a thread, and I was a professional at pulling threads. I cross-referenced the LLC with the city's Department of Buildings database. The results were illuminating. There were dozens of complaints filed against my building over the last decade. Complaints about lack of heat, rodent infestations, faulty electrical wiring. Most were marked as resolved, but a few were still open, languishing in bureaucratic limbo. More interesting were the permits, or lack thereof. There was a permit for a new boiler in 2015, but nothing since. Yet I knew for a fact that the apartment on the first floor had been completely gutted and renovated just last year, a job that would have absolutely required permits for the plumbing and electrical work. He was doing unpermitted, off-the-books construction, cutting corners to save a buck. The picture of a slumlord was coming into sharp focus. I kept digging, falling deeper into the rabbit hole. I pulled the deed history for the property. Thorne Properties LLC had purchased the building 12 years ago. I looked at the mortgage documents associated with the sale. The original loan was from a standard commercial bank, but then, 3 years ago, he'd refinanced. The new lender wasn't a bank, it was another LLC, Ironclad Financial Group. I'd never heard of them. I ran a search on Ironclad. The company was an enigma. It had a registered address at a P.O. box in Delaware on no public-facing website. It was a ghost. This was a major red flag. Legitimate lenders don't operate like this. This was a hard money lender, the kind of place you go to for a loan when the banks won't touch you. They offer fast cash at exorbitant interest rates, with brutal terms for default. Why would Thorne, the owner of a valuable piece of New York real estate, need to go to a shark like Ironclad? A new theory began to form in my mind. a theory that went far beyond a creepy landlord and a leaky faucet. Thorne wasn't just a bully, he was desperate. He was over-leveraged. He was in debt to someone dangerous. And that desperation was making him sloppy. It was making him cut corners, do unpermitted work, and try to squeeze every last dollar out of the building and its tenants. And the illegal entries, it suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. He wasn't just being a creep. He was likely showing my apartment to prospective renters without my knowledge, trying to line up a new tenant for a higher rent before I was even gone. Or maybe he was checking to make sure I wasn't doing anything that would draw the attention of the city, anything that would jeopardize his precarious situation. My small, personal lawsuit for harassment and illegal entry was no longer about just me. It was the tip of an iceberg of fraud and desperation. I saved everything to a secure flash drive, logged out of the system, and walked out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed to glitter with a new kind of energy. I had come looking for a shield, but I had just found a sword. The first official shot fired was a formal cease and desist letter. I drafted it myself, using the same language and format we used at the firm for billion-dollar corporations. It was a thing of beauty, cold, professional, and utterly menacing. It detailed his illegal entries, cited the specific state and city statutes he had violated, referenced the video evidence, and formally demanded that he cease all unauthorized contact and entry. I sent it to him via certified mail, requiring his signature, the legal equivalent of a slap in the face. Simultaneously, I filed a complaint in small claims court. The maximum you could sue for was $10,000, and I went for the full amount. I cited breach of the warranty of habitability, harassment, and illegal entry. I attached a list of every documented issue, every unanswered repair request, every instance of his negligence, and, of course, I noted the existence of video evidence of his trespassing. The court date was set for 6 weeks away. I knew Thorne would receive the notice in the mail. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to be intimidating. What I didn't expect was the petty, vindictive war of attrition he decided to wage. It started small. My mail started going missing from the lobby, just junk mail at first, but then a magazine subscription, and then a letter from my sister. I knew it was him. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. Then came the noise complaints. I lived alone. I worked 12-hour days. My idea of a wild night was falling asleep on the couch while watching a documentary. Yet, I received 2 official notices from Thorne, slipped under my door, citing excessive noise levels after 10 p.m. and threatening fines. He was building a paper trail. He was trying to establish me as a problem tenant, so he could try to evict me before our court date. The hot water became a recurring issue. It would be off for hours at a time, always on the weekend. When I would text him, he would reply hours later with a curt, "Looking into it." It was a transparent tactic of harassment, designed to make my life so miserable I would simply give up and move out. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. Every single instance, I documented. I started a new file, a log of his retaliation. I took photos of the notices. I screenshotted the text exchanges about the hot water. I spoke to my neighbors, the quiet couple across the hall, the young students downstairs. I discovered they weren't having hot water issues. It was just me. I got them to sign affidavits to that effect. His campaign of misery wasn't breaking me. It was just making my case stronger. Every petty act of revenge was another nail he was hammering into his own coffin. One evening, I came home to find a notice taped to my door. It wasn't a noise complaint. It was a formal notice to cure. It claimed that I had violated my lease by making unauthorized alterations to the premises, and by creating a nuisance. The unauthorized alteration, I had installed a new, sturdier lock on my own door. The nuisance, my baseless legal actions against him. The notice gave me 10 days to cure these violations, meaning to remove the lock and drop the lawsuit, or he would begin eviction proceedings. I stood in the hallway, reading the notice, and I actually laughed. It was so clumsy, so transparently retaliatory. It was a legal document drafted by a bully, not a lawyer. He was trying to use the law as a weapon, but he was wielding it like a club, with no finesse and no understanding of its rules. I took a photo of the notice, Exhibit D for my harassment claim. I went inside, bolted my new lock, and sat down at my laptop. His little notice didn't scare me. It did the opposite. It told me that I had him rattled. My little $10,000 lawsuit was a much bigger threat to him than I had even realized. He was desperate to make me go away, and that made me even more determined to stay. He had escalated things, and I was more than happy to meet him at the new level. The small claims case was a start, but Thorne's eviction notice was a game changer. This was no longer just about harassment, it was about my home. I was a damn good paralegal, but I wasn't a lawyer, and housing court was a different beast. It was time to bring in a professional. I couldn't use anyone from my firm. We were corporate sharks who dealt with mergers and acquisitions, not tenant disputes. Asking for help would be like asking a brain surgeon to fix a broken leg. Plus, I didn't want anyone at work knowing about my messy, personal battle, so I did what I do best. I researched. I spent a weekend scouring legal aid websites, tenant union forums, and court records, looking for a particular kind of lawyer. I didn't want a slick, high-priced attorney. I wanted a fighter, a specialist, someone who knew housing law inside and out and, preferably, hated landlords like Marcus Thorne. That's how I found Abe Goldman. His name kept popping up in connection with landmark tenants' rights cases from the last 30 years. He was a semi-retired, one-man operation with a small, cluttered office in a less fashionable part of Brooklyn. His website looked like it was designed in 1998. Everything about him screamed old school, no-nonsense advocate. He was perfect. I called him on a Monday morning. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Goldman. Mr. Goldman, my name is Clara Jenkins. I began, my voice steady. I'm a paralegal, and I'm in a dispute with my landlord. He's attempting a retaliatory eviction, and I need representation. Landlord's name, he grunted. Marcus Thorne. There was a pause on the other end, and then a low chuckle. Thorne, of course it's been a few years. I see he hasn't changed his ways. What did you do? Ask him to fix something. Something like that, I said. I'm also suing him for illegal entry and harassment. You have proof, video evidence, I said, and a mountain of documentation. I also have some research on his financial situation that might be relevant. That got his attention. Come in this afternoon, he said, 3 o'clock, and bring everything you have. He hung up. His office was exactly as I'd pictured it. Books and files were stacked on every available surface, threatening to avalanche at any moment. The air smelled of old paper and strong coffee. Abe Goldman himself was a small, weary man in his late 60s with a halo of white hair, and eyes that were sharp and intelligent behind thick glasses. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a beloved but crotchety university professor. I didn't shake his hand. He just grunted and pointed to a chair. For the next hour, I laid out my case. I started with the bookmark and the hair on the door. I played the video from the nanny cam. I showed him the log of harassment, the photos of the notices, the signed affidavits from my neighbors. He listened intently, his expression unchanging, occasionally nodding. Then I opened the second file, the one about Thorne Properties, LLC. I walked him through the shell company, the unpermitted construction, the history of tenant complaints, and finally, I showed him the documents about the loan from Ironclad Financial Group. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly, and steepled his fingers. Ms. Jenkins, he said, and his gruff tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like awe. You are not a paralegal, you are a goddamn private investigator. He stood up and began to pace the tiny space between his desk and a teetering pile of books. This is not a small claims case anymore. This isn't even just a retaliatory eviction. This is a bomb. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes gleaming. This Ironclad Financial smells rotten, and the unpermitted work gives us leverage I hadn't dreamed of. Thorne isn't just trying to get rid of you because you're annoying him. He's trying to get rid of you because he's terrified you'll expose him. Abe grinned, and it was a fearsome sight. He has no idea what's about to hit him. We're not just going to fight the eviction, we're going to countersue, we're going to subpoena his financial records, the LLC's records, everything. We're going to put him and his entire shady operation under a microscope. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally, a warrior. So you'll take the case? I asked. Abe Goldman stopped grinning and looked at me with dead seriousness. Take the case, he said. Ms. Jenkins, I wouldn't miss this for the world. This is the kind of case that reminds me why I became a lawyer in the first place. The next phase of the battle was fought on paper, under Abe's guidance. We transformed my meticulous research into a series of legal filings that were designed to exert maximum pressure. We filed a formal answer to the eviction notice, denying all claims and asserting a robust defense of retaliation, but the real weapon was the countersuit. It was a work of art, a sprawling, 30-page document that we filed in New York Supreme Court, a venue for much more serious matters than small claims. We sued not just Thorn, but also Thorn Properties LLC. We listed every grievance, from the illegal entries to the campaign of harassment, but we went further. We accused him of constructive eviction, of intentional infliction of emotional distress, and, most importantly, of engaging in fraudulent business practices, citing the unpermitted construction and the pattern of neglect that endangered all the tenants in the building. Attached to the lawsuit was our first set of discovery demands. We demanded every financial statement for Thorn Properties LLC for the last 5 years, every loan agreement, every communication with Ironclad Financial Group. We demanded the names and contact information for every contractor who had ever worked on the building. We demanded a full list of all tenants, past and present. We were asking for the keys to his kingdom. We knew he would fight it. We knew he would file motions to quash the subpoenas, to dismiss the case, but the legal requirement, to respond, to engage, was now upon him. The clock was ticking. Thorn's response was predictable. His lawyer, a slick-looking man from a small but aggressive firm, filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit as frivolous and an attempt to harass a respected property owner. Reading the motion was almost comical. It painted Thorn as a pillar of the community, a benevolent landlord besieged by a single, vindictive tenant. He's running the classic bully playbook, Abe said, tossing the motion onto his cluttered desk. Deny, attack, and portray yourself as the victim. It won't work. The harassment, however, did not stop. In fact, it escalated. One morning, I woke up to find my front door smeared with what looked and smelled like rotten eggs. Another day, a thick, official-looking notice was posted in the lobby accusing certain tenants of harboring pests and warning of a building-wide fumigation that would require everyone to vacate. A full day. It was, of course, a complete fabrication, designed to turn the other tenants against me. But something unexpected was happening. His campaign of terror was backfiring. The other tenants, who had previously been too afraid or too tired to get involved, started talking to me. The couple across the hall, the quiet Mr. and Mrs. Chen, stopped me in the hallway to tell me Thorn had tried to blame me for a crack in their ceiling. The students downstairs, a group of 3 young women, told me he had threatened to raise their rent illegally if they associated with me. Thorn's clumsy attempts to isolate me were uniting us. He was creating the very thing he feared most, a coalition. I organized a meeting. We all gathered in my apartment one evening, a nervous but determined group of 6. I laid out the whole story, showing them the evidence I had collected, explaining the lawsuit. I told them about the unpermitted work, the potential dangers of the faulty wiring, the reason the building was always falling apart. For the first time, they saw that their individual problems, the leaky pipes, the drafty windows, the mice, were not isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a single, systemic disease. Marcus Thorn. By the end of the night, we had formed a tenants association. I was the president. The Chens were the treasurers. We were a small, unlikely army. Abe was delighted. This is it, he said over the phone when I told him. This is our leverage. It's not one tenant against a landlord anymore. It's the whole damn building. The court denied Thorn's motion to dismiss. A judge ordered him to comply with our discovery demands. He was legally required to turn over his financial records. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, I felt the unmistakable thrill of impending victory. He had tried to make me homeless. He had no idea I was about to return the favor. The documents arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 15 boxes of them, delivered to Abe's office, smelling of dusty basements and desperation. This was the fruit of our discovery demand. Thorn's financial soul laid bare in paper and ink. He had fought it for months, his lawyer, filing extension after extension, but the judge's order was final. He had to produce the records. He's hidden what he can. You can bet on that, Abe said, prying open the first box with a letter opener. And he's buried what he couldn't hide in a mountain of useless junk. This is a classic. Document, DUMP. He's hoping we'll drown in the details. Abe was right. The first 10 boxes were mostly fluff. Utility bills from a decade ago, ancient insurance policies, bank statements with endless pages of trivial transactions. It was a deliberate needle in a haystack strategy. Designed to exhaust us, but I was born for this. This was my job magnified. For days, Abe and I, along with 2 of the student tenants who volunteered to help, holed up in his office, fueled by coffee and pizza. We turned the conference room into a war room. Spreading documents across the massive table, sorting, scanning, and analyzing, I was looking for one thing in particular, the loan agreement with Ironclad Financial Group, according to the list of produced documents. It should have been in box 7, but it wasn't. He's withholding it, I said to Abe, a knot of frustration in my stomach. / This is the one thing he's actively hiding. It has to be the key. Then we file a motion to compel. Abe grunted, not looking up from a ledger he was examining. We'll get it, Clara. He can't hide from a court order forever. But I was impatient. I decided to try a different angle. I went back to the public records. To the deed of trust that had been filed when Thorne refinanced the building. Attached to that deed was a collection of other documents, including a UCC-1 financing statement. It was a standard form that lenders filed to secure their interest in a borrower's assets. It was dense, boring, and full of legalese, and I read every single word. And there, in a tiny addendum on page 11, I found it. It was a name I was not expecting. The UCC-1 statement was signed not by some anonymous functionary of Ironclad Financial, but by its managing member, a man named Vincent Costello. The name sounded familiar. I ran it through my firm's deep background search database. The result that came back made the hair on my arm stand up. Vincent Costello was not just a hard money lender, he was a known associate of a notorious New York crime family. He had a rap sheet a mile long, though most of the serious charges had never stuck. He was a loan shark of the old school variety, a predator who preyed on the desperate. Ironclad Financial Group wasn't just a shady lender, it was a front, a money laundering operation. Marcus Thorne hadn't just taken out a bad loan, he had gotten into bed with the mob. Everything suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Thorne's desperation, his willingness to cut any corner, to break any law, to squeeze every penny out of the building. He wasn't just trying to pay his bills. He was trying to pay off the mob before they broke his legs, or worse. I felt a genuine jolt of fear. This had started as a dispute over privacy and repairs. It had now spiraled into something much, much darker. We weren't just taking on a sleazy landlord anymore. We were poking a hornet's nest of organized crime. I called Abe immediately. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. Jesus, Clara, he finally whispered. This is bad. This is really, really bad. What do we do? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. We use it, he said, his voice regaining its familiar, steely resolve. This is the ultimate leverage. Costello and his friends want to stay in the shadows. The last thing they want is to be named in a civil suit, to have their business practices exposed in a courtroom. They'll cut Thorne loose in a heartbeat to avoid that. He paused. We have to be smart, we have to be careful. But we just found his Achilles heel. And it's a big one. He was right. It was dangerous, it was terrifying, but it was also the key to everything. Thorne thought his connection to Costello was his dirty little secret. We were about to turn it into a spotlight. The deposition of Marcus Thorne was scheduled to take place in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. It was a pivotal moment. Under oath, he would be forced to answer our questions. Lying would be perjury. Abe and I had a new strategy. We weren't just going to ask him about the leaky faucets and the illegal entries. We were going to walk him into a trap of his own making. Thorne arrived with his lawyer, looking smug and confident. He was dressed in another expensive suit, his smirk firmly in place. He clearly thought this was just a formality, a game he could win with bluster and denial. The first hour was routine. Abe asked him basic questions about the building, his tenants, his maintenance procedures. Thorne was a terrible witness. He was arrogant, evasive, and condescended to Abe at every opportunity. He denied the harassment. He claimed the video of him in my apartment was doctored. He insisted he was a model landlord. Then, Abe shifted gears. He picked up a copy of the loan application Thorne had submitted to Ironclad Financial, a document we'd finally received after filing a motion to compel. Mr. Thorne, Abe began, his voice casual. I'm looking at your loan application to Ironclad Financial Group, dated June 2022. Could you confirm this is your signature on the final page? Thorne glanced at it. Looks like it. And in this application, Abe continued, you state that the property has no outstanding code violations and that all recent renovations were performed by licensed and bonded contractors with all necessary city permits. Is that correct? Thorne's eyes flickered towards his lawyer. A tiny bead of sweat appeared on his temple. To the best of my knowledge, yes, he said, the best of your knowledge. Abe repeated gently, you oversaw the renovation of apartment 1A yourself, did you not? I managed the project, yes, and yet, the Department of Buildings has no record of any permits being filed for that renovation, Abe said, sliding a certified document from the DOB across the table. So when you signed this application, you were aware that you were providing false information to your lender, correct? Thorne's lawyer jumped in, objection. This is irrelevant to the matter at hand. On the contrary, Abe said smoothly, it speaks directly to Mr. Thorne's business practices and credibility. This is a loan secured by the building in which my client lives. Its terms and the circumstances of its creation are highly relevant. The objection was noted, but Abe pressed on, Mr. Thorne, did you or did you not lie on this loan application? Thorne was squirming. It was a clerical oversight, he stammered. A clerical oversight, Abe repeated, letting the words hang in the air. I see. Let's talk about your lender, Ironclad Financial Group. You have a personal relationship with the managing member, do you not? I have a professional relationship with the company, so you don't know the managing member personally, Abe pressed. A Mr. Vincent Costello? At the mention of the name, Thorne went rigid. The change was palpable. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a stark, primal fear. His face went ashen. He looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with panic. I don't recall, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. You don't recall? Abe leaned forward, his voice like ice. Mr. Thorne, you are under oath. Are you prepared to state, for the record, that you do not know a man named Vincent Costello, a man whose signature appears on your loan documents, a man who federal prosecutors have described as a known associate of organized crime? Thorne's lawyer threw his hands up. Okay, we're done here. This deposition is over. He started packing his briefcase, telling Thorne not to say another word, but it was too late. The damage was done. Thorne didn't have to answer. The sheer terror on his face was answer enough. We had him. He had lied under oath. He had committed bank fraud. And he was entangled with the mob. He was a dead man walking. As they practically fled the conference room, Abe leaned back in his chair and gave me a slow, satisfied smile. Checkmate, he said softly. The disastrous deposition was the breaking point. Thorne's confident facade had been shattered, and his carefully constructed world was collapsing. His lawyer, likely realizing he was representing a man who had lied under oath about his connections to the mob, went into damage control mode. A few days after Thorne fled the conference room, Abe received a call. They wanted to talk about a settlement. They're spooked, Abe told me, a triumphant gleam in his eye. They know we have them on perjury, on fraud, and they know we can tie them to Costello. The last thing any of them, Thorne, his lawyer, or especially Costello, wants is for this to go to trial and become public record. The initial settlement offer was insulting. They offered to forgive my rent for a year and pay me $20,000. Contingent on me signing an ironclad non-disclosure agreement that would bury the entire affair forever. Tell them to go to hell, I said to Abe without a moment's hesitation. That's my girl. He chuckled. So what do we want? What's our counter? We talked for an hour. Weighing our options, we could push for a massive financial settlement. Given the evidence, we could likely get a six-figure payout, enough for me to put a down payment on my own place and never have to deal with a landlord again. It was the logical choice, the safe choice, but as I sat there, thinking about the Chens across the hall, the students downstairs, and all the other people Thorne had bullied and neglected, a simple financial payout felt insufficient. It would solve my problem, but it wouldn't solve the problem. The problem was the building, the problem was Thorne. As long as he owned it, he would continue to be a plague on his tenants. And then, a crazy, audacious utterly insane idea began to form in my mind, an idea born from my late night research into tenants' rights and cooperative conversions. What if we don't ask for money? I said slowly, testing the words. Abe looked at me, intrigued. Go on. His only real asset is the building, right? I said, leaning forward, and it's an asset he can't afford. He's about to default on a loan to a loan shark, he's facing lawsuits, and he's likely going to be investigated for bank fraud. The building is a millstone around his neck, so Abe prompted. So I took a deep breath. We don't ask for money, we ask for the building. Abe stared at me, he blinked. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. A sure sign that he was processing something significant. You want him to give you the building, he said, as if confirming he'd heard me correctly. Not just to me, I clarified, my mind racing now, to the Tenants Association. We form a housing cooperative. He signs the deed over to us. In exchange, we agree to assume the debt on the property, not the loan from Costello. That's his poison pill to swallow, but a new, conventional loan that we would secure, and, of course, the lawsuit and all our claims are dropped, the NDA is signed, the whole thing goes away. I laid out the logic for Thorne. It would be a lifeline. He gets out from under the thumb of the mob. He avoids almost certain prosecution for fraud. He walks away with nothing. But he walks away free. For Costello, his dirty business stays out of the courts. He takes a loss on the loan, but he avoids exposure, and for us, the tenants, we get control of our homes, we get stability, we get justice. Abe was silent for a full minute, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the most fearsome, beautiful grin I had ever seen. Clara Jenkins, he said, his voice full of wonder, that is the most brilliant, insane, and magnificent thing I have ever heard in 40 years of practicing law. He slammed his hand on the desk. Let's do it. Let's ask for the whole damn thing. The settlement conference took place a week later. The atmosphere was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. It was us, me and Abe on one side of a massive mahogany table. On the other side was Thorne, looking like a ghost in a suit, and his shell-shocked lawyer, and at the head of the table, in a surprise appearance that made my heart hammer against my ribs, was a stone-faced man in an impeccably tailored suit who introduced himself as counsel for Ironclad Financial. We all knew who he really represented. Vincent Costello had sent his man. Abe let them make their renewed offer first. They'd upped it to $50,000 and 2 years of free rent. Abe listened patiently, then slid a single sheet of paper across the table. We reject your offer, he said calmly. This is our counter offer. We suggest you read it very carefully. Thorne's lawyer picked it up. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw them widen, first in disbelief, then in something that looked like horror. He slid the paper over to Thorne, who read it and turned a shade of pale. I didn't know was humanly possible. Then, the paper was passed to Costello's lawyer, who read it with an unreadable, reptilian stillness. This is absurd, Thorne's lawyer sputtered. This is extortion. No, Abe said, his voice like flint. This is a business proposal. A solution to a series of very complicated problems. He then proceeded to lay out the situation in cold, clear terms. For the benefit of everyone at the table, he spoke of the perjury Thorne had committed in his deposition. He spoke of the irrefutable evidence of bank fraud on the Ironclad loan application. He spoke of the unpermitted work that opened Thorne up to massive liability and city fines. And then, he looked directly at Costello's lawyer. And it is a solution, Abe said, that ensures your client, Mr. Costello's business enterprise, is not unwillingly dragged into the public spotlight of a messy, protracted, and potentially criminal legal proceeding. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. We know who you are, and we will burn the whole thing down if we have to. Costello's lawyer was the first to speak. He ignored Thorne completely. His focus was entirely on Abe, and in this proposal, he said, his voice a low purr, my client's interest in the property, the outstanding loan, is a matter for Mr. Thorne to resolve with your client privately. Abe replied smoothly, our cooperative would be seeking new, conventional financing. Your client's lien would be satisfied at closing, assuming Mr. Thorne can come up with the funds, or perhaps your client will simply consider the debt uncollectible. A cost of doing business. It was a masterstroke. Abe was offering Costello a way to disappear from the equation, leaving Thorne to hold the bag. Thorn looked like he was going to be sick. He saw what was happening. He was being thrown to the wolves. "You can't do this," he whispered, looking at Costello's lawyer. "We had a deal." The lawyer gave him a look of pure, reptilian contempt. He didn't even deign to respond. He turned his attention back to Abe. "We would require an unbreakable non-disclosure agreement," he said, / "and all evidence, documents, and recordings related to this case are to be turned over or destroyed." "Agreed," Abe said. "Then, Ironclad Financial finds this proposal an acceptable path forward." He stood up. "You will be hearing from our transaction counsel." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Marcus Thorn utterly and completely alone. Thorn just sat there, a broken man. His last line of defense had abandoned him. He was trapped between a mobster he couldn't pay and a lawsuit that would ruin him. We were his only way out. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, pleading hatred. I met his gaze and held it. I felt nothing, no pity, no triumph, just the quiet, clean satisfaction of a complex problem being solved. His lawyer sighed, a sound of profound defeat. "We'll have our attorney draw up the transfer agreement," he said, his voice a monotone. "My client agrees to the terms." The signing took place 2 weeks later in the same sterile conference room. The mood, however, was entirely different. The tension was gone, replaced by a surreal, almost dreamlike sense of finality. I sat at the table, representing the newly formed Furby Tenants Cooperative. Beside me was Abe, looking as proud as a father at a graduation. Across from us sat Marcus Thorn. He looked 10 years older. The smugness was gone. The expensive suit hung on him like it belonged to another man. He was a ghost. At his own funeral, there was a mountain of paperwork: the deed transfer, the settlement agreement, the non-disclosure agreement, the documents formally dissolving our lawsuit. I read every single word of every single page, my paralegal instincts on high alert until the very end. Everything was in order. Then came the moment. The lawyer slid the deed transfer document in front of Thorn. He placed a pen in his hand. "Sign here, Marcus," the lawyer said softly. Thorn picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. He looked down at the paper that would formally strip him of the last thing he owned. He hesitated. For a second, I thought he might refuse, that he might choose to go down in flames rather than hand over his kingdom to the little lady in apartment 4B. He looked up, and his eyes met mine one last time. I didn't offer him a smile. I didn't offer him anything. I just waited. With a deep, shuddering sigh, he bent over the table and signed his name. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a world turning upside down. His lawyer took the document, passed it to the notary for her stamp, and then slid it across the table to me, my copy. The proof. Then, Thorn's lawyer placed a small, simple manila envelope on the table. "The keys," he said. I reached out and took the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy. The master keys to every apartment, the key to the basement, the key to the roof, the keys to the kingdom. Keys that, just a few months ago, he had used to violate my home. Now, they were mine. Thorn stood up, not looking at anyone, and walked out of the room without a word. The door closed behind him, and he was gone from my life forever. I sat there, holding the envelope, the signed deed in front of me. Abe patted me on the shoulder. "Congratulations, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, you magnificent, crazy bastard. You actually did it." It didn't feel real. The idea was so absurd, so impossible, that my mind was struggling to catch up with the reality. Clara Jenkins, a 29-year-old paralegal who just wanted her landlord to stop creeping around her apartment, was now, in effect, the landlord. I owned the building. We walked out of the law office and into the bright city afternoon. I clutched the envelope of keys to my chest. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held. The first week of owning the building was the most exhausting and exhilarating week of my life. The surreal victory in the conference room quickly gave way to the harsh, practical realities of property management. I was no longer just a tenant. I was the one they called when the toilet overflowed. Our first official act as the Furby Tenants Cooperative was to change the locks on the front door. The feeling of hiring a locksmith to replace the hardware that Thorn had lorded over us was a moment of profound, tangible satisfaction. Every tenant got a new key, a symbol of our new beginning. Our second act was to hold a building-wide meeting, this time not as a nervous group of conspirators, but as co-owners of our own destinies. We gathered in the lobby, which we had scrubbed clean of its grimy, neglected past. I stood before them, not as a leader, but as a representative, and laid out the plan. We had secured a new loan from a community credit union that specialized in housing cooperatives. The terms were fair, and our combined monthly maintenance fees, which were less than the rents Thorne had been charging, would cover the mortgage and create a new fund. A repair fund, first on the list, I announced, holding up a clipboard, is a full electrical inspection and upgrade. Second is a new boiler before winter. Third is hiring a professional, non-rodent exterminator. A small cheer went through the lobby. The work was endless. I spent my evenings and weekends on the phone with plumbers and electricians, getting quotes, scheduling work. I created spreadsheets to track expenses. I used my legal skills to draft new fair house rules. The Chens, who had lived in the building for 20 years, became my unofficial advisors, telling me stories about its history, its quirks. The students downstairs volunteered to paint the hallways. We were a team, we were a community. One Saturday, I was on the roof, inspecting a crack in the parapet wall, when Mr. Chen came up to join me. He was a quiet man, a retired tailor who rarely spoke more than a few words at a time. He stood beside me, looking out over the city, my wife and I. He began, his voice soft. We thought we would have to move soon. We are too old for the stairs if the building keeps falling. We thought we would have to leave our home. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a deep, quiet gratitude that was more meaningful than any victory in a courtroom. You gave us back our home, Clara, he said. I just nodded. A lump forming in my throat. I thought back to the woman I was just a few months ago, the woman who felt so powerless, whose most private space had been so casually violated. I had started this fight for myself, for my sanctuary. I had wanted to reclaim that small, fourth-floor apartment, and make it feel safe again, but somewhere along the way, the definition of my sanctuary had expanded. It was no longer just the space within my four walls. It was the whole building. It was the quiet couple across the hall, and the students downstairs, and the old woman on the second floor who always smiled at me. I had sued my landlord to get my privacy back, but what I had won was so much more. I had won a home, not just for me, but for all of us. The keys in my pocket felt a little lighter now, not a burden, but a responsibility. And for the first time in a long time, looking out over the endless, chaotic city, I felt completely, unshakably safe.